Huhi has shaped up to be one of the most valuable supports in the LCS, and I think he's largely underrated. I think his willingness to play different styles and fulfill different roles is something unlike any other support in the LCS. So you have to go back in history to fully understand who he was as a player, because he came from Korea back in 2015, where he briefly touched the challenger scene with the likes of Team Fusion, which had, people like Nintendo, and then he went into the LCS with CLG for IEM San Jose in a lineup of Darshan, Xmithy, Huhi. He was in the mid lane at the time, Stixay, and then Afromoo. And this team was really fucking good. And particularly, they were good at thinking outside the box and kind of changing the meta. And currently, now Huhi has 2 titles to his name. And the fact that he won 2016 Spring with the aforementioned CLG, and then 2021 Summer with 100 Thieves. And what made CLG so special in 2016, and particularly Huhi and his playstyle, was he was really good at facilitating his side lanes and particularly managing the ability to pressure the side lanes with the likes of Darshan. And so he was really obviously famous for the likes of his Aurelion Sol pick, but a lot of people actually forget that his Rise was also feared as well. Actually, they were both banned in the 2016 MSI series against SKT in the finals of that MSI. And particularly, he was just really good at roaming and getting roam timers around the map in general, no matter what his champions were, whether that be the likes of something like a Talia or Aurelion Sol or, Rise. He was always good at transitioning over into the side lane. And in 2019, he actually role swapped to support for the Golden Guardians Academy, and then he was brought onto the main squad in 2020 with the likes of Haunter, Closer, Golden Glue at the time, and then it was I think it moved over to Damonte, and then FBI was his ADC. And this team was fucking incredible. They punched well above their weight. They were expected to get pretty far, last. I think many people predicted them to be like 8th place or something like that. And so this lineup punched above their weight very hard, and they got into the playoffs. I think they ended up 5th or 6th, but it was a really good squad, bigger than the sum of their parts. So they were picked up by 100 Thieves for 2021 because Golden Guardians basically had a fire sale, and this, I guess, kind of alludes to the fact that Golden Guardians didn't have any money for the longest time, which is why, they're out of the LCS now. So I guess that was kind of a premonition. So we should have seen the signs. But Huhi was phenomenal in all of these different lineups, and I think it was largely because he's been known to be the shot caller in almost every team that he's been in, whether that even be the secondary shot caller in CLG, because obviously that was Afromoo as the primary shot caller, or with Golden Guardians, and especially 100 Thieves, he was the primary shot caller. And you can see just the tendency of his teams, or how they kind of play or play throughout the game, and the fact that a lot of the times they're willing to do a lot of different skirmishes and things like that. And also, if you look at, say, his junglers, for instance, he's worked really, really well with the various junglers that he's had, right? Whether that be Closer or River, they've both been junglers that have wanted to skirmish very heavily in the early parts of the game. And he's always been willing to scrap as a support player, often leaving his support or leaving his ADC to fend for themselves in the bot lane while he goes and picks a scrap, with his jungler to go and do an invade or, make a gank on the mid lane or whatnot. So he's always been willing to do that and always been willing to sacrifice his own lane laning phase for the betterment of his jungler. So I think he works incredibly well with any jungler that he's been paired with thus far. And I think another big underrated thing that a lot of people overlook when they look at the history of Huhi himself is the fact that he's integrated quite heavily into North America just as a culture itself. You got to remember, this guy came from Korea. Like, a lot of people forget and think like, oh, maybe, he's a Korean American or something, and, he just has a little bit of an accent, but, maybe he was like homeschooled or some shit. Like, no, this guy came from Korea way back in the day, and he was actually one of the first imports to the LCS. So that just goes to show that a lot of people forget that he's even an import to begin with. The fact that he's integrated himself so well into North American society just speaks volumes into his dedication to the LCS and to his entire, esports organizations, and of course his teammates as well, to be able to learn English to such a high fluency on top of all of that, right? But I think most importantly, and the reason why I like Huhi as a support player is just because he's willing to pick up shit that no other support is willing to pick up. I mean, like, for instance, his set most famously was a support that nobody else was picking during the time. I think he had been playing this in 2019 or 2020, I want to say 2020, with the likes of Golden Guardians. No other support was really playing that pick at the time. And that was something that a lot of other teams feared against him. And the fact that sometimes they would even have to ban it because they just didn't want to play against it because they didn't know how to play against it. So, he's always been willing to pick up different champions. And I think obviously some of his best champions have been, of course, the engage champions, such as, he would use Set as a support engage, or Leona, of course, he's very famous and known for, or even Nautilus, he's very good on as well. But even his Rel, he was one of the few support players that consistently started playing Rel, and he was one of the guys that kind of first picked it up. So it's just his ability to pick up champions very quickly and find the niche champions that will also be effective later is something that's completely underrated about Huhi just as a support player. And then you can also go to his enchanters. I think aren't that anything that bad either. I think he's actually quite good at some particular support champions like Nami, for instance, or Lulu. And Lulu might be a holdover of back when Lulu was a mid lane champion, like way back in the day. Lulu was a mid lane champion or a solo laner champion, so like mid or top could play it. So it would often be a flex pick sometimes as well too. So he's able to play champions like that, enchanter champion. So it's not like he's just, a one-trick pony or a one-trick style and can only play one set of champions with engage. Yeah, he's the best at engage, but he's also heavily serviceable on things like enchanters. And currently, right now, actually, I took a look at his solo queue, and he's been learning marksman supports like Ashe and Senna. So he's willing to branch out and willing to play different things. And currently, even right now, I think he's also playing ADC a lot in solo queue as well, too. So he's very much open to branching out and trying and willing to do different and new things. And that's kind of crazy given, his age as a player. He's been playing League of Legends for fucking 10, 11 years professionally. So that's pretty rare to be able to find a old school player that is willing to expand their champion pool and pick up, these different niche picks, or even pick up something that is meta like marksman supports. Now, as far as the ADC that Huhi has worked with both, FBI and Stixxay really are the only two ADCs that, he's had as being a support player. But I think that speaks to the longevity of him as a player himself in terms of how he's able to get along with his ADC. I mean, you just look at both of these different players. I think they've both been phenomenal ADCs. They've been ADCs in which he has built up personally, from kind of like ground zero, I guess, with FBI. And then, of course, Stixay, of course, learned lessons from Afromu and everything like that. But then he was able to like integrate himself immediately and then stick to Stixay's playstyle and kind of teach him different things. And what's wild about that is that FBI and Stixay seem to have like kind of different personalities, right? You have FBI, who is an Australian, they're always kind of hard-nosed and they have hard personalities and things like that. And they're very like argumentative or disagreeable and tough. And then you have Stixay, who is obviously an American and more agreeable in that sense. So he's been able to work with both of these different ADCs, both completely different personalities. And I think that speaks volumes to the flexibility in terms of, how Huhi is able to deal with different personalities themselves. So when you look at just the range in which these two personalities are, I think that Huhi can kind of work with anybody, because that covers a pretty large spectrum of the people that you could actually work with. And then you look at his top laners that he's worked with. I think most of his top laners have looked like gods whenever he's worked with them, whether that be, Darshan in 2016, when Huhi was obviously a mid laner back in the day. Darshan looked like a fucking beast back in the day, being able to split push and tear apart the map. And oftentimes that was because Huhi was also able to split push and start tearing apart the map as well too. So it was kind of a big two-threat team. And then obviously you had the core of Stixay and Afromu. Then you had Haunter in 2020. First of all, I think Haunter was underrated in 2020, and I don't know why more people didn't mention of how standout of a performance that he had back in the day in 2020. I think he was a phenomenal top laner, and I think that was largely due to the ability to where Huhi was able to take all of these different skirmishes and things with Closer, as they were able to do invades and do different skirmishes, different Drake fights or Rift Heralds and whatnot. Then you had Someday in 2021, who looked like a fucking beast on 100 Thieves. Like, he just was tearing apart the entire league. Everybody was afraid of facing against Someday. Obviously, of course, later on, he kind of fell off a bit. But then Licorice in 2023, where he won the fucking MVP, right? It's just wild, right? Of, all pro MVP. He was able to get, first all pro, not MVP, but he looked like a fucking beast in Golden Guardians for 2023. And I think in large part that's because Huhi was able to roam around and he unlocked his mid laner, which then of course unlocked the rest of his team and whatnot. And he was able to take a lot of different skirmishes with River and help him navigate the entire map and whatnot. So all in all, I think Huhi is kind of invaluable to all the teams that he's been on. And I think that just also speaks to the longevity and his ability to try different things, try different strategies, try different teammates, and play with different personalities. So I think he's definitely one of the most underrated players as far as support players in the LCS. And I hope we get to see more of him throughout the years and see what he's, been cooking up in the off seasons.